there's been a lot of feedback lately. Some of you may have seen the petition that's going around for, related to Chevron NPCs. And I think there's some really important points. Some of what I think is captured in this document and in these conversations I've had has to do with the effect that happens more over time. I do see us on a trajectory of moving to a single class of NPC instead of having, a solo and a group designation. That is not something that we do overnight. It's not, a switch that we turn on and off. It's something that we have to do thoughtfully and kind of, make sure that it's not disrupting, some of what's currently possible. The important thing that's come up in a lot of these conversations, well, there's several things. One of them has been the sense of player power and player progression. Regardless of how you look at it, whether you're doing a camp in EQ or you're, running a specific instance in WoW, you go into it with a reasonable expectation that at the end of your time, you're going to leave with the item you're there for. One of my least favorite things hearing right now is people that have come back to Halnir Cave in their 30s and 40s, or in their 30s or level 40 to try and camp something like Rip Smack, and they spend days and days trying to camp an item for an alt that they leave and don't get. When that item is meant to be something that players are able to find as they're adventuring in Halnir Cave. That's kind of the dichotomy that's happening here. And so I think there's a balance there that's needed. Right now I feel like it's so far to I basically rarely get anything that I'm interested in camping and getting, that it just starts to kind of create this mentality that levels are really the only thing worth doing. If I have the option to go somewhere and just level versus, potentially take a few hits or maybe even slow leveling down a little bit for the sake of trying to get an item that's going to absolutely, have a good effect on me, it's there's just not any point, because it takes way, way, way too long, and it's so unlikely that you're going to get it that it's players just aren't doing it. They're just not. They're coming back later once they're way, way higher level to try to get it, and even then they're I don't. I've heard several that just give up. So again, that's number one. Number two, one of the big complaints or arguments against this idea of having Chevron or elite NPCs is how it creates this kind of dichotomized world where you have solo NPCs that are kind of pushed over as anybody can do, and then you've got group NPCs that you need a full group to do. You don't need a full group to do, but that's kind of the mentality. And there's a lot to unpack with that. And a lot of our internal discussion has been around, some of the tediousness that comes from needing to kind of, every single mob that you fight back to back to back to back has these layers that require coordination, which is difficult for pugs, but also fatiguing even for statics and voice comm, tight groups. But just know that we agree, and we're looking at that. The second issue that I want to address is what I'll call the chill factor. A lot of the feedback could be summed up as, I want there to be times when I'm in the right mindset and when I'm going in with the purpose of doing content that's very attention requiring, that's intense, but I want that to be times. I also want to be able to log in, and if I'm grinding and I'm grinding for hours and I'm killing thousands of NPCs, I don't want to have to constantly be monitoring icons and coordinating and communicating with the group on, making sure this is set up and then this happens and these things are done, all to kind of bring the mob to a point where, we feel like we're doing more of an optimal, kind of output as a group. It's affecting the chill mode that you can do this with, which I think is also affecting, how many players are, really going into these dungeons or these more challenging areas, because it is very intense. So we've been doing a lot of thinking about that. Don't expect this to be solved like in a in an instant or in a single patch. This is a process. The first couple of steps that we're going to take is, number one, we're going to reduce the amount of different debuffs that the techniques can provide. So instead of there being, a potential of like 4 different resistance debuffs that all stack, instead we want to reduce that, where not only are there less debuffs that, techniques are capable of creating, but we're also going to, instead of there being a caster specific and a melee specific version, resulting in like a pierced armor through this combination and a severed armor through this combination, and you need both and they both stack, and so you have to coordinate like a melee version and a caster version, all that. We're just going to have one outcome. So if you do want to reduce armor class, it doesn't matter if it's initiated by a casting class or a melee class or whatever it is, it's going to result in the same outcome. I'll hear examples from people that'll say, I have camped this item for a really long time. I'm getting this gear, I'm getting these new items, I'm doing these things, and yet I don't feel like stronger. So I want to explain what's going on there. This is not intended. Right now, strength is supposed to improve and increase your weapons damage. There are a couple of issues happening with strength right now. Number one, instead of strength applying a constant increase to your melee damage, it's functioning as a roll, meaning it has a chance to increase your melee damage. The twofold problem with the strength right now is that, number one, it's rolling instead of always applying on every hit. The second problem is it's being applied after the mitigation rolls instead of before. There's an order of operations problem there. Once those two things are fixed, it should make a significant difference in how melee damage and melee upgrades feel in the game. We're going to set it up in a way where the technique-based debuffs are inferior to class debuffs, so much so that they won't stack. We're also going to be looking at it in an effort to kind of find that unified class of NPC where we don't have solo and group, but we have like a single NPC type. We're going to be doing additional looks at like the various mitigations and things that they do have, where, probably just bringing it down a few notches so that it's it doesn't feel as much of a requirement right now for non-optimal group makeups or whatever to feel like they can still, function well. Another part of this overall path of addressing these things is going through and basically kind of streamlining and doing a little bit of a simplification on our NPC abilities so that you're not being inundated, with all of these crazy things going on at once, where if you get a pool with 2 or 3 NPCs and they're different types and they all have like 5 or 6 abilities that they're using and some of them are just kind of way out there, we're going to be streamlining that quite a bit more. And we're not going to lose those ideas, but we're going to instead take some of those crazier things and put them specifically on like a named NPC or, a mini boss or something like that. So you'll still see some of those more perplexing mechanics, but it'll be like that. This is what it means to fight a named NPC, to make them a little bit more, difficult to deal with. Along with that is going to come some kind of rebalancing of things like AoEs and things that, typically hammer health pools and things really, really, really fast, really abruptly, that can kind of come out of nowhere. We want to kind of pull some of that back a little bit. And in fact, just the sheer amount of things that you can interrupt, we're going to be turning down a good bit as well. Even just needing to watch for interrupts will be less of a thing that you're doing, all the time. I think one of the things that I wanted to try, and this is an idea that Trex had mentioned and reminded me of the other day, yesterday maybe, of what they did with EQ actually, which is the cloudy pots, basically the Invis potions that were vendor bought. They were pretty expensive, even just in the very short term. Having some relatively expensive potions that you can buy at vendors that would allow someone like a warrior or, you know, someone else to be able to get down to a group that they want to join. It wouldn't be a super long lasting invis or anything like that, but it would be long enough to allow for players to actually get down to groups if they can't invis themselves. So I think that's a really great idea in the short term to try and help some of this backfilling issue. Because generally, again, the goal is like we want groups doing group things in group areas. Like we want players in dungeons. We want them going deep. Part of the overall framework of all the things that are going to make these changes feel good and all come together in harmony is what we've already been doing, which is getting the rest of the class kits filled out. There's like Shaman right now. Shaman are in a really, really good place. They're able to do really nice DPS. They're, you know, flirting with, you know, some of the top spot DPS right now, literally just because they have all their abilities. They actually have abilities that are properly scaling up to higher levels. As more and more classes get to that point, I think we're also going to start seeing, you know, some of this feeling of like, I don't feel strong enough. I don't feel like I'm getting stronger. I think that's going to start to feel a lot better. And I mean, it's a pretty common sense thing, but I'm just throwing it out there as just another part of the whole equation. With our current experience system, I'm almost tempted for us to use a different color scheme, because light blue NPCs in Pantheon are actually still really decent experience. I'm wondering, for example, if the current dark blue was like a purple and the current light blue was a dark blue, like how that might change the more EQ-minded players in terms of where they feel like is a reasonable thing to fight. You're getting a lot more experience from light blues than you are in Pantheon than you would in EQ. We're going to be walking back on traits a little bit as well. For the time being, we're changing our bosses to not have potentially up to 2 traits, but to only ever have 1 at the most right now. I think walking some of these things back a little bit so that we can have special intended moments where we dial it up is going to be a really good change overall. So let's talk about Halnir Cave. Making it a little bit more accessible in the beginning. We've done a little bit of population change with like the placement of NPCs in the areas leading up to and including the bridge. So that means the first room you enter, the first ramp, the switchback, the crossroads, the bridge room, all those areas we did a pass on to try to make it a little bit more accessible and even potentially allow for a few more groups at once to be able to kind of coexist in there, especially if they're not full groups. We've also, you'll see once you get in there, that we've created a few more potential little camp areas, places where there used to be a mob every single like step of the way. So there was nowhere to really kind of like set up. We've tweaked that slightly to where there's a little bit of a spot. The Bloodsick are now level 16 to 18 to give an alternative to the Black Rose area. And then we tweaked the Blood Lich to be a guaranteed spawn on an hour cooldown, which is kind of an interesting new change. We did some similar placement tweaks in the Black Rose minor room on the right before you get to kind of the final Black Rose Keep Cave area. We cleaned that room up a little bit to make it actually feel a little more viable as a camp spot. We more properly divided the Wraiths and the Cryptlings into kind of 2 different tiers. And so now the Soldiers, the Striker, the Mana Weavers, things like that, they're now level 20 to 22. And then the higher level Wraiths, the Reavers, the Evokers, Cultists, Praetors, they're level 26 to 28. And then the Celestium Shepherds at the very end, the very bottom, those are now either 27 to 29 or 28 to 30. So it actually feels like if you're down at the depths of Halnir Cave, you've actually got stuff down there to fight that's of that level. So I think it's going to feel a lot better. And then we tweaked the respawn time in the dungeon to be a little bit faster. A little bit faster than it was. Under level 10, gray mobs investigate and attack level 34. I think that is a bug. Like, I've heard that reported a few times. I think there may have been something that was tweaked or changed that's causing that. But if something's gray, it should have almost no aggro radius to it. Like, you would have to be literally almost on top of it, like standing inside of it for it to to aggro you. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Invis is supposed to have a chance to start fading early. You know, when a buff's about to fade and it starts kind of flashing and blinking like that? Invis is supposed to have a chance not to just break, but to have a chance to start fading. I don't want invisibility, at least like a base level invisibility. I'm okay if it grows into something more powerful, but at least the baseline, I don't want it to fully, completely mask every potential for an NPC to hear you. I want there to be at least be a little kind of mindfulness of like your orientation around certain NPCs. Does awareness serve any actual purpose in a PvE environment? Absolutely it does. Well, yes. Yes, it does once we get stealth NPCs working properly. So we can start incorporating them into the population. But yeah, it definitely will serve a major purpose there. These are the kind of conclusions that we come to when you guys are given great feedback. It doesn't have to be doom and gloom feedback. It doesn't have to be like this game is gonna die if this. But give great feedback, which you're doing. Give us time to process. Give us time to allow things to kind of play out a little bit. But at the end of the day, like, you know, I think as a whole, we're gonna get there. And I do believe that after these changes, I think Pantheon is going to just as a whole feel so much better, so much cozier, with plenty of moments of intensity, plenty of moments of, you know, butt pucker, lock in, like, you know, this is very hard, but also in general, a lot more coziness, a lot more enjoyment, a lot more reward for the risk, reward for the time. I just, yeah, I'm feeling really good. Feeling really good about it.